I guess we can get straight into it, and then if anyone else joins a little bit later on, I'm sure they'll be able to catch up and get the gist of it. But as usual, we'll record this and we'll post it on the Foundation's YouTube, and we'll share it on the Discord as well for everyone to have a listen to after. Just to give everyone a bit of a TLDR, so for those who are new to these, what essentially happens is these are the AMAs that we do fairly regularly, but this one is specific to the grants program extension proposal that went up last week. There's obviously been a lot of conversations and comments that are ongoing, which is awesome to see. Some comments from familiar faces, from new faces to the ecosystem, some new endorsed delegates, which has been awesome to see. What I'll do in a second is I'll pass it over to Derek and Carl just as a bit of introduction for those who don't know them both. And then we'll kind of get into the thick of their recent proposal. And I'll ask a few questions first up here. And then if anyone wants any clarification or if anyone wants to ask anything differently, feel free to ask in the comment section and or at the end, raise your hand and then we can bring you on the stage. Cool. Head over to you then, Carl and Derek. I'll let you do a bit of an introduction and then we can get into things.
Hey, yeah, thank you very much. So for anybody who hasn't seen us around before, Derek and I both work at Reverie, which is an investment advisory firm across the crypto space, and we've been active in dYdX since 2021, like fall 2021, although, I've been around for quite some time before that, but we launched the dYdX grants program in January of 2022, and since then have been around kind of working across a few different areas as well, including the initial dYdX operations trust, and we're kind of playing some role in a few other proposals and have just kind of been very active and I've been super excited and happy to be here. Derek, I don't know if you want to give a quick shout or anything that I may have missed.
Yeah, I think you covered it, but just quick hello to everybody. I've been working with Carl on dYdX for almost 2 years now. So it's been good to see a lot of familiar faces here and happy to talk more about what we're doing with the DGP.
Awesome. Thanks for that both. I guess let's get stuck straight into the proposal. It might be worth drawing kind of an initial comparison of kind of what you were doing in the DGP 1.5 before, and then kind of a difference between that and the new DGP proposal 1.5 extension.
Yeah, for sure. So for anybody who isn't familiar, the dYdX grants program was set up in January of 2022 with the mission of funding kind of community contributors and outside contributors to help promote and grow the dYdX protocol. So we fund grants across a variety of categories, including infrastructure, research, protocol development, community initiatives like events, workshops, and some other stuff. So for anyone that hasn't had a chance to read it yet, the proposal to extend the current version of the DGP 1.5 is live on the forum under the header dYdX grants program v1.5 extension. I recommend that you have a look at it and would obviously appreciate any thoughts or feedback. I think the first question is maybe why an extension and why another renewal, which we already had earlier this year. The quick answer is we're still facing the launch of dYdX v4. But the more exciting answer is there's been a ton going on in the development of v4, which has needed the grants program to step in and fund initiatives that are playing a key role in this transition and kind of in this development. And so we want to make sure that the program remains active in the next few months to keep funding these initiatives and really to keep playing this kind of key role of finding external contributors and talented experts to kind of play this important role in helping us in this v4 transition. So this extension is really here to keep us going these next few months so that we can keep playing this important role. But we also have some pretty big ideas around what a future version of the grants program might look like. And so we also figured that this extension would be a great opportunity to start experimenting with a broader set of contributors. So that's kind of been the biggest shift from what was DGP v1.5 before and what the new version of DGP v1.5 will be. So the current program has Reverie acting as grants lead and enforcer, and then a set of 5 trustees managing the multi-sig and approving grants. So you can think of Reverie and then the trustees. And Reverie is kind of responsible for core actions of the grants program, and then the trustees hold Reverie accountable by reviewing and approving all of the grants that are issued, and by maintaining and kind of safekeeping the funds as part of the DGP. The new version is going to break up this grants lead role that Reverie has played into what we're now calling a grantor and an operator. The grantors are responsible for drafting RFPs, sourcing grantees, submitting them for approval, tracking milestones, and kind of managing their completion, and then doing some of the reporting that we've done as well. The operator, on the other hand, will be responsible for payments and financial reporting of the program. By splitting these roles, we're introducing more controls and allowing the program to onboard new contributors, which we think is really important as we head into this v4 setting and this kind of like expanded contributor set of a more open source protocol. And then finally, what we're also doing is splitting the grantor roles actually between two funding buckets, a community initiative bucket and a strategic initiative bucket. In our experience, these two buckets kind of capture all of the most impactful grants at the moment. And so we think like in the coming months, like those two funding categories should remain the most important ones. We think eventually we might be able to introduce more buckets, but for now, this is a good start. And so just to confirm, the community funding focuses more on like local community initiatives like events, marketing, sponsorships, content, and kind of building on what we've previously done around more community-focused initiatives, whereas strategic is focusing on some of the larger grants like infrastructure, research, development, and partnerships, which has also been a big category for us in the past. And this split, again, lets us onboard new contributors to the program by introducing additional grantors in this new role. And so it expands the people that are involved in the DGP. So that's kind of the biggest difference from what was DGP 1.5 and what will be the new version of DGP 1.5, which again is really extending up to 6 months because we're also actively kind of keeping an eye on the progression of V4, and we'll be like excited to revisit the DGP and see if even earlier we can go back to the community with the new version, kind of what we're calling the V2 version, and see if there's a need for additional funding from the community treasury. Because as a reminder, the DGP right now has 2.1 million in funding left. And so that's what we're using heading into this extension. I'll stop there. I think that was quite a bit of information, but hopefully that covers some of the kind of the core aspects of this proposal.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. That was really detailed. I guess before we dive any deeper into sort of the new extension proposal, it'd be great to kind of go back and just analyze some of the recent grants that have happened over the past 6 months, or double down in terms of like which ones have made the most impact or which ones are you really proud of. I guess it'd be awesome to just talk about some of those grants that have really made an impact over the last 6 months.
Yeah, definitely. So these past 6 months have been really fun and have gotten us really excited about the future role of the grants program in the V4 setting for a few reasons, which I can go over. But I think the biggest change definitely was unlocking this new funding category, which is protocol infrastructure. So now that V4 is kind of progressing in a really nice way, and we're starting to learn more about what the infrastructure and what the chain will look like, the grants program can actively fund contributors to play a role in actually building and supporting this future chain. And so we've been kind of exploring these different categories, and we've actually been funding grants like the indexer service, which the Imperator team are leading now, and which will be going live by next week, actually, which that's kind of a key element and infrastructure of the V4 chain, which is going to support all on-chain data queries. Similarly, we funded Strangelove to build out the CCTP bridge, which is cross-chain transfer protocol. What that's going to do is support Ethereum-based USDC deposits to the dYdX v4 chain. And so what that means basically is anybody who's on Ethereum today who is using dYdX will be able to kind of seamlessly deposit their USDC onto v4 without really even knowing that they're actually bridging over to what is a totally independent protocol, right? We also funded relayers to support more native USDC through the Noble chain. And then we also have kind of started to explore a bit more public goodsy, but very targeted with the intention of making dYdX much more powerful through, for example, the development of vote extensions on the Cosmos SDK. And that is going to play a role in supporting future protocol upgrades like a significant improvement to pricing oracles and also MEV mitigation if it works. I say public goodsy because technically other protocols will also benefit from this, but this is a role that we're kind of very excited in, and in finding targeted areas across the protocol stack, which may include Cosmos SDK or Comet BFT or other areas that kind of other protocols use as well. But by targeting these specific areas and finding qualified teams, we can make sure that development there progresses more efficiently and quicker, basically, so that dYdX can benefit from it. And so I mentioned MEV mitigation there at the end, and MEV has actually been among the biggest areas of focus for us. And just yesterday, we saw Skip's dashboard go live and kind of the trading team share a blog post, which we're super excited to see. And I think that's going to be one of our most impactful grants, definitely. So just to confirm, as we head into V4, there's a lot of concern around the impact of MEV on kind of the trading experience and the potential like malicious capturing of MEV rewards, which would take place in the form of order censoring or front running. So in other words, when we trade on dYdX V4, there is a possibility that the validators whose role is to support the protocol also actually censor trades or reorder or front run trades in a way that allows them to profit from it, but obviously hurts the trading experience. I mentioned vote extensions earlier, and that's kind of this longer term way of mitigating it. But for now, the best that we could think of was let's just monitor these validators to try and see who is doing this activity. And in doing so, we can start to implement potential penalties on them. So it might take the shape of slashing, or it might just be like asking everybody to undelegate from them so that they drop off the active set. It could be a few different things, but it's going to be just it's just really cool to see that even before the protocol is live, we've already been able to kind of unlock this solution to what is going to be a pretty big problem, at least from our perspective. And in addition to that, we've also had Chorus One working on a big paper, and we are now funding additional research on trusted execution environments, which is another potential area of MEV mitigation in the future. So all of those that I mentioned have been really impactful. We've also had others, but I could spend all day talking about my grants because I love them all. But the other ones is just, we also set up the community cauldron where we had a ton of really cool initiatives that deserve highlight as well. And I recommend that anybody who's interested in those kind of read Alexis's latest report where he highlights all of the awesome events and kind of initiatives that were funded there.
Awesome. Thanks for running through those, Carl. Yeah, definitely a lot of that are going to be really impactful, I think, over the short, medium and long term. I guess touching back on the proposal, and you mentioned kind of the difference between strategic initiatives, community initiatives, etc. How will that functionally work from like an application stage side of things? Obviously, currently people go onto the DGP website, they apply for a grant. Like functionally, how will this differ if you have those, say, two buckets of things?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And to be honest with you, we're actually still like mapping out exactly from an operational standpoint how that's going to play out. But basically, the way that it works on the application side is when you submit an application through our website, it goes to a database on the back end. And it includes with that these kind of immediate categories, which you can either self-select or are appointed. And so the process will be that based on the categories that are screened within the database, they'll be assigned to the different grantors. And then the grantors will go onto the database, which is their table, and be able to see the applications that have been received, that have been flagged to be within their bucket. Obviously, there might be kind of false assignments occasionally, and what we just expect there is the grantors to kind of proactively reassign them to the other bucket. There's this interesting dilemma of like, what if something falls in between? And I think there, what we'll decide is based on the funding amount, and also just generally we'll have to apply just some, a bit more like qualitative assessment with regards to, where would this fall technically, what is the impact, and how would we fund this this initiative, and then we'll decide based on that which grantor should choose for assessment. But that kind of does tie into what is the goal of this extension, which is this is very much an experiment, and we are taking steps to make sure that we're not just diving in head first with like a crazy amount of funding and some insane goal of we have 10 different buckets and this is going to be super efficient and everything. This is a big change already, and so what we're doing is only having these 2 buckets to kind of learn from that, and then we'll share with the community how it's going and whether there is an opportunity to continue to expand in this way. One result might be that this just doesn't work, right? It might be like, guys, this isn't efficient. It's slowing everything down, and we're having to manually flag everything too much, and maybe it just doesn't work. I think it's going to work, and I think we'll be able to set it up in a way that makes it good. But it's going to be a learning process for all of us, definitely.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess based on that, there's been a lot of discussion, even for this proposal, through the last proposals that you and the team put together around a kind of like fully decentralized grants program. Like, what are your thoughts on this? Is this something the ecosystem could accommodate in the future? Like, it obviously has its benefits and drawbacks, but would love to know your kind of thoughts on, decentralizing, I guess, the decision-making process in a grants program.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to try to stop myself from going too like theoretical and philosophical about the question of decentralization, because I think that could be a totally separate 2-hour-long AMA. But what I will say is, like, when we think about decentralization, there is a spectrum there, and I think some interpretations of it is this idea that decentralization means everybody should have a say in everything at all times, and everything should be visible to everybody at all times. To me, that's not a realistic interpretation, and I think we have to admit the fact that we are an organization, and within an organization, you will have to appoint certain people to carry out certain tasks in order for that organization to run efficiently. What you can do is make sure that multiple people can, at any point, assign themselves or kind of attempt to take over that responsibility, which is very much the case with the grants program, for example. We have the current grants program, but there's nothing stopping anybody from coming in and saying they want to run an additional one or they want to take it over or anything like that. At the same time, it becomes the community's responsibility to just kind of hold and make sure that the people who are carrying out those tasks are doing it in an effective way and are doing it appropriately. And that, to me, is the role of decentralization. Now, I think with this extension, we are exploring this idea of distributed decision-making within a grants program already by splitting these 2 funding buckets. And I think it's also important to mention that the trustees are there and they're active, and they do also play a role of distributed decision-making. I think Reverie has been very active on the community side, and it can sometimes be difficult to remember that there is already an active set of people that are reviewing and monitoring everything that's being done, and it adds this element of redundancy. But with that being said, I think there will be opportunities to keep exploring additional funding buckets and more grantors. But what I will say is, as a community, we kind of need to accept the fact that there will be responsibilities that need to be carried out by certain individuals. You can think of the operations trust, for example, as well. Like, you can't just distribute that across a broader set. You can even think of roles like the indexer or the front end. When it comes to the indexer, that's going to be a core piece of our infrastructure on the v4 protocol. We're going to have to appoint somebody to run that indexer, and we are going to have to just depend on them to do it in an efficient way. That doesn't mean we get to say where they deploy the indexer, like what server they run it on or anything like that. What we should just say is this indexer doing a good job or not? And it will be decentralized in the sense that anybody can deploy their own indexer, and then we as a community can decide we want to use that indexer, not this one. It obviously varies a bit with the grants program because there's a lot of off-chain activity as well. But generally speaking, I think we are getting to the point of decentralization that should fit the needs and kind of the standards of this community.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think just touching on a few questions that are coming in from the chat as well, which might link into my next question about the need to say potentially add this kind of operator role that you suggested in your proposal. A couple of questions have come in from Kagan around kind of implementing community feedback around transparency around applications, payments, timeframes, etc. I mean, was that the thoughts from the operator role, or how are you envisioning that coming into play?
Yeah, definitely. So the operator role was a great one in our opinion in improving the kind of control and also onboarding new contributors, which to the point of decentralization does distribute this decision making and this participation, which overall improves the decentralization of the program. So just to confirm, the operator role is responsible for issuing payments based on the milestones that are checked off by the grantors. And then from that, the trustees approve the payments that are issued through the operator. And then the operator will also be responsible for kind of financial reporting on a monthly basis and making sure that everything checks out from like an accounting perspective. That's a role that was currently being carried out by Reverie, and we felt like that didn't need to be done by a grantor. And as we start to appoint more and more grantors, it was important that that become an independent body as well, so that they have no sort of conflicts or any sort of like ties to the grants as well, because if you have one grantor from one bucket issuing payments across all the buckets, who knows, it could introduce some conflict there. And so having an independent body was just a great way, honestly, to expand the contributor set while adding more controls to the program.
Cool, thanks, Carl. And then for, say, potential grantors in this community bucket or any future bucket that may be enacted in the future, like any advice or any potential lessons learned from the past 18, 24 months or so for those applicants?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been a long journey, right? A lot of lessons learned, definitely, and I think we can compile another kind of lessons learned as well as we head into this v1.5 extension. But generally speaking, I think what's important is to remember to just try to focus as much as possible on the impact of the protocol and maximizing the value of the grants program for the community, because at the end of the day, this is the community's treasury that's being deployed. And so what matters the most is that the funds that are being deployed in an effective and kind of impactful way. And so it can be tricky at times to figure out what the best way to do that is, and you get a lot of applications and there's a lot of noise. Right now we're getting over 100 applications a month, and so that is a lot of noise to kind of filter through. But if you just kind of stick to the core tenets of kind of like attempting to deliver as much impact and to grow the protocol in the most effective way possible, then ultimately it should be easier to figure out what makes sense from a funding perspective. Yeah. Derek, I don't know if you have any thoughts as well there, but that's kind of the best that I could put it right now.
Derek, I don't know if you're speaking. If not, I can. You're just on mute. I can.
I guess. What's the specific question?
It was around.
Sorry, it was. I go for it, Jim.
No, it was around, say, you've been in this almost position for the last 18, 24 months, taken a lot of lessons learned from being in the dYdX ecosystem. For these future contributors that may come in this sort of community bucket per se, have you got any advice or lessons learned from the history of being in this program to what makes a successful, I guess, contributor function here?
Yeah, I would say communication is really important. Any person that is part of the DGP, whether they're a grantor or the enforcer or a trustee, their role is to act as a bridge between two different parties. One is the community, token holders, users, validators, and the other is the people behind the scenes that are applying for grants, that are working on stuff. it's the DGP's job to communicate all that and make sure there's a clear, transparent line. And yeah, I think it's important that every single person involved is aware of that and makes an effort to proactively communicate those really what's going on behind the scenes. So I think that's something that people have asked for a lot, and we've definitely made a lot of effort around this.
That makes sense. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Carl, about that. Cool. And then there's obviously a lot of comments around this kind of 10-90 split. I guess would love to hear your kind of thoughts and reasoning behind that.
So we're basing that largely off of like historical context from the funding that we've done. So as a reminder, we launched the Community Cauldron a few months ago, which is kind of the foundation of this community initiatives bucket. And through that, we were able to kind of focus a lot of our attention, thanks to Alexios, who was spearheading it, on different community initiatives, kind of more localized events and marketing and content. They were awesome and they were really impactful. But what we also found is generally speaking, the funding requirements for those grants are much lower. And so with even just like a few $100 to a few $1,000s of funding, we can have a lot of impact within local communities, and we can deliver really awesome grants. On the flip side, as we start to work on like the indexer and some of these other roles, what we're finding is those are actually quite capital intensive. The indexer grant, for example, was upwards of $300,000 in funding, and that's because there's a lot that goes into that, right? And just actually, most of that funding is going explicitly towards just paying for the cost of supporting the indexer, like the actual infrastructure costs. There's also stuff around like the MEP dashboard and other stuff like that. And so just like these infrastructure costs of supporting these key components of the V4 protocol are a lot. There's nothing we can do about that right now. That's just how it is. And so from our perspective, this 90-10 split allows both buckets to deploy funding effectively and kind of benefits the protocol in the best way. Obviously, that could change. And so part of the trustee's role now is going to be to allocate funding between these two buckets and try to determine, based on the developments of the protocol, what would be the most efficient use of this community funding. And so it could be that in a few months we have funded things on the strategic side, and maybe we've covered a lot of the bigger ones, and now we can fund slightly smaller ones, and that means we free up some capital towards community initiatives, and maybe there's a big community initiative that wants to get done that would kind of require readjustment of this split. They're totally free to do that, right? That's the trustee's responsibility. This recommendation from us is just based on context that we have running the program and expectations that we see for the upcoming months and kind of priorities for the DGP.
Agree. Thanks for that, Carl. That's helpful. And then touching kind of on the latter half of the proposal, obviously you reiterate timelines, when kind of you're expecting contributor submissions and the snapshot vote. I wonder if you could just touch on like finalized dates, I guess, for both of those.
Yeah, so just to confirm, the current version of the DGP expires on August 15th, which is a couple weeks from now. And so what we're hoping to do is get the proposal up by August 13th so that we kind of avoid any sort of significant disruption to the grants program. And that way we can get moving on everything else that might be needed on the infrastructure side and kind of get these community initiatives going as well as quickly as possible. We obviously want to avoid a delay, given that now, for example, we've paused new approvals for the grants program because we don't want to start approving if this isn't going to get approved on the proposal side. So it does disrupt just the overall flow of the program, and so we're trying to get that through as quickly as possible. So the 13th is the target deadline for the snapshot proposal going up. In the meantime, we've gotten lots of applications for these different new roles and everything, and so we are going to have the applicant AMA next Thursday, which will give kind of all of these applicants a chance to discuss their background, their experience, and kind of their interest in the program, and also let the community meet them and also ask them questions so that we can kind of get a better idea of who these people are and who it might be that we're onboarding to the program. At the same time, what we're doing is conducting interviews with these applicants so that the trustees will be able to assess the qualifications and kind of their backgrounds and decide a finalist list for the proposal, which would be decided by kind of by the 13th. Basically, that's the deadline as well for deciding on the finalists. So this next week is going to be a busy one, but the goal is to have everything ready by the end of next week.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to that AMA as well. Cool. I guess I'm just running through some questions that have come in on the comment section, but before we open the floor up, Carl,
sure.
Is there anything else you wanted to touch upon before we get into some of these questions?
No, I think these questions have been great. Really appreciate them. I think we've covered pretty much everything. Yeah, we're just super excited, honestly, by this new extension, and we're excited for the future of the grants program. I think now more than ever is we've just are finding so many awesome opportunities to fund initiatives both on the community and kind of the larger strategic side. And so it's awesome to have seen mostly positive feedback around this proposal and then also like constructive feedback around ways that we can continue to improve it. And that's definitely going to be taken into consideration as well. And I think we're all kind of on the same page that this is a step forward and that it will lay the foundation for a future V2 version, which could continue to expand on this based on the results. So appreciate everybody taking the time to kind of weigh in and share their thoughts. And yeah, I think we can take some questions.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Carl and Derek. That's really helpful. I guess one coming from Kagan here, maybe it'd be good for you to sort of touch through or even, give some early thoughts on how you view potentially DGP v2 come if this extension passes. Are there any kind of initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question and something we're thinking a lot about. I think it's a little early to be talking about specifics for DGP v2. I think there needs to be more information about what dYdX v4 looks like, and there will be more information once it actually launches. I can say for now, like some of the ideas that we think could be useful in DGP v2 we're experimenting with in this extension. And that includes adding additional contributors to the program and bringing in other stakeholders across the Cosmos ecosystem. So if those experiments go well, I think those are things that we'll continue to do in future iterations of this program. But again, very far off. I think there's a lot that we don't know yet, and we'll have to see how things evolve.
Yeah, agree with Derek there. If we knew that we would be doing the V2 proposal right now, not the 1.5 extension, but definitely I think like what we can expect is an expansion of the experimentation that's happening right now with this extension around adding more contributors and seeing how that goes, and then based off that, just kind of building up this broader V2 version.
That makes sense. And one from RV talking through the snapshot vote, is it going to be kind of like a snapshot vote, purely extension, here's the list of candidates, this kind of one vote, or is it going to be kind of like separate sections? I'm not sure if snapshot can even accommodate that, but is it literally going to be, hey, here's the proposal extension, yes or no with these people type thing?
Yeah, the format right now that we're expecting is definitely that the existing trustees will effectively decide on who they believe should be the future stewards of the program and put that forth as part of the proposal. And so it would be voting on this final slate of candidates, and the community will decide through that vote whether or not these people will be appointed.
That makes sense. And there's a really good question that's coming actually from Takeshi, which I think sometimes is not fully understood in the community. Are all Reverie members going to focus on strategic initiatives, or is it a few of you? It'd be good to know kind of how many of you are involved, et cetera, et cetera.
Good question, Takeshi. So yeah, Reverie is a company that has 5 contributors total. Not all of them are going to be working on dYdX. On the Reverie team, myself and Carl are the ones that are going to be spearheading and focusing on it. At times, others like Larry and Miles have spent time on the DGP and dYdX, but really it'll be Carl and myself that are focusing on the strategic initiatives.
Fantastic. Thanks, Derek. And Ramix, our job applications for the program still open? I might be interested in the screener role based on my experience in the field.
They are very much still open. Please submit your interest on the forum post where we're kind of keeping a list of everybody that's applied and we're tracking there.
Awesome. And then Kagan, when will discussions and plans around this begin? Do you mean around kind of applicants or REV2? Yeah, Derek, Carl, maybe you want to take that.
We don't have a specific date. I think the way to think about it is when there's sufficient information about what V4 looks like, and also some history of what V4, sort of how it works in practice and empirically, that's when I think we'll have enough data to start even having an informed discussion around a V2. So let's assume that V4 launches sometime in September, October. I think a few weeks after that, maybe another month or two, we can start to brainstorm as a group, like what a V2 looks like. But again, I think very open to, Kagan, I know this is something you've been thinking a lot about. Feel free to continue posting on the forums and thinking about ways that V2 and other funding programs can be designed.
Cool. Thanks, Derek. Are you open to building a decentralized platform to run a council-centric platform that's entirely decentralized, transparent? I mean, I think there are platforms out there like this currently, but I'll let you kind of take that one on, Derek or Carl.
Yeah, it's a big question. It's a good one. I would say it's hard to say without knowing exactly what that looks like. I think there's some merit to it, but I think it is difficult if you're working with external commercial entities to have for them to be dealing with like a decentralized platform. Like a lot of these groups need to sign commercial contracts and they need to have counterparties, and doing that when you're trying to face a community is really hard. And that's not to say that this decentralized platform wouldn't work. I think we're experimenting with that right now. I think with the two different buckets. So we'll see how that goes. I'm personally a little skeptical that let's say having 4, 5, 10 different buckets or 10 different entities under one funding umbrella. I'm a little skeptical that will lead to great outcomes long term. I think that can sort of show some information about who's sort of most effective and best, but I don't know that that's actually, if you're optimizing for outcomes, a good structure. So I think that's my initial thoughts.
Cool. Thanks, Derek.
Yeah, maybe one question.
Which cost of the program will be shared between buckets?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good question actually from the operational standpoint, right? So we have kept it slightly like open for now, but the final proposal will have a bit of a more formalized like budget and breakdown of costs and everything. Obviously, right now the current budget is fluctuating every day with the change in price of dYdX, given that the kind of DGP's funding is somewhat tied to dYdX, and so roughly speaking, right, we split it across this 90-10 for the funding bucket, but what will happen is we'll take the exact amount of funding that we have left at the time of the proposal, we'll debit from that the compensation that's being attributed to all of the contributors, including the grantors, the operator, the trustees, and the enforcer. And then we're also debiting from that these two operational budgets that were, which is legal and then just the operations. So the operations right now, the only cost we have is maintaining the dashboard on a monthly basis, and then we also have the website. And so we don't expect additional operational costs to pop up, but we do bucket some slightly extra like cushion in case there are additional things that we need to kind of to expense to the program. But any sort of operational expenses would be for both buckets, right? I don't envision this requirement where like the community initiatives bucket needs some tool that the strategic initiatives bucket doesn't need. We kind of will use the same tooling and the same costs. Basically, will be shared across each bucket. So it's really the program's costs, not necessarily split between each. Hopefully that made sense and explained it a bit.
Brilliant. Thanks, Carl. Cool. I know there's more questions coming in, but again, I guess anything else from the proposal that you both want to touch on? I guess just a reminder that the proposal is on the forum right now. Would encourage anyone here who hasn't seen it and is asking questions and or is interested, feel free to go onto the forum and have a look at that post.
Yeah, I see there's some active discussion in the chat if the DGP is open to funding research into a framework. I mean, I can't speak for others, the other trustees, the enforcer, and the community grantors. But my assumption is that everybody, including us, are very open to funding qualified people working on thoughtful initiatives. And that includes a framework and system for funding.
And just to clarify as well, Takeshi asked another question at the start, was around the number of, I guess, say, positions right now. Like, how many trustees are currently being sort of looked for, I guess, from a community bucket standpoint, the operations standpoint?
Yeah, and so I think the question is how many candidates are available for kind of application. And so what we have is we have one grantor on the community initiative side that we'd like to appoint, and then the trustees, we're kind of keeping it slightly open-ended. Our existing trustees, some of them will be leaving more proactively, others are open to staying on, but they're also open to stepping off if it's kind of like they feel like new trustees could play a better or an improved role, or generally speaking, they might just eventually decide. And so that one we'll decide slightly based on the final slate of applications. And then we also have the enforcer role that's open, given that Reverie will be stepping off as the enforcer to act exclusively as the grantor. So we have the grantor, we have 3 to 4 trustees, and then we have the enforcer. Those are all of the open positions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Carl. Cool. I guess we can close this off and start to wind this down then if there's no more questions. Just to clarify then, Carl, before we close this, we've got an AMA next Thursday, same time actually as now for the applicants. Encourage everyone to turn up. That'd be awesome. Keep engaged on the forum where this discussion is happening. And yeah, I'm sure if anyone wants to reach out to you two specifically, guys, where are you most active, where people can connect?
Yeah, feel free to ping me on Discord. I'm around, and then we also do have the grants channel. Feel free to ping us there if you want to make it more in a discussion setting. But feel free to just DM me on Discord, and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for turning up, and we'll close it off there, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Carl.